All right, here we go. This is Sean Work. This is the Worketing podcast. I just started a week ago, so this is my first official podcast because the first podcast was the pilot episode. It was called the Marketing Team, One Marketer Marketing Team Dilemma. Um, I usually talk about internet marketing, SEO, web development, conversion, marketing in general. I've been doing this stuff since 1999. I've worked for a startup called Kissmetrics. I've worked for Crazy Egg, which is another web analytics tool, mostly B2B marketing, internet marketing startup tools. Is what I work on. But I've built millions of sites over the years. Well, not millions, hundreds. Um, done a lot of just been in the trenches, like doing hand coding HTML to building WordPress sites to playing with conversion optimization tools. I do a lot of blogging. I've been running blogs, internet marketing blogs for a long time. I run the Kissmetrics marketing blog. I currently run the Crazy Egg marketing blog. So I'm pretty deep in this stuff. So I have this podcast to kind of just help people out and share what I know, and also hopefully someone catches. I mean, one of the most important things to me is to continually learn, and I might be wrong about something. So hopefully through one of my podcasts, as I'm trying to educate people, someone will pick up on something that might not be totally correct, or I might need to dig a little deeper on or learn the newest uh, about what's going on in that subject matter. So that's also a good thing. It's kind of a good way to check myself. So obviously, please comment and let me know what you think, and let me know if you ever find a discrepancy in something I say. Okay, so this is the first real episode, and I'm going to go over site speed, website speed, because it's a really important topic. It's probably, I think most people tout it as the number one conversion killer. If your website's slow or hangs up for any reason, chances are you're going to lose that visitor, and you're not going to get a conversion. So, and a conversion could be a sale, a sign up, whatever the goal of the website is. And we all know about this. Like if you go to a site that won't load, you click away, you close the tab, you leave. I mean, it's pretty obvious. But studies say that the faster your page loads, the higher your conversion rates are usually. And as website owners and people who build sites and people marketing sites, sometimes we forget, like, we're used to being in our site every day, so we're comfortable with the speed. We know when it's going to load. It doesn't bother us. We have to be in there. But for someone else, 2 seconds might be too much. So every time we can trim off some time, the better we are. So we're going to go over some things today that talk about how you can improve your website speed. And it's actually a lot of the bulk of it. It's pretty easy. You don't have to be a web developer really to take care of this stuff. There's a lot of tips out there on how to do it, but a majority of what you need to do is only one thing. So we'll get into that right now. So probably half of you out there probably already know what it is. It's your images. The images hosted on your site are going to be most likely the biggest thing that slows down the site across the board. Images generally have the largest file size of anything on a web page, and then when you have multiple images on a web page, the cumulative file size is really big for a web browser to download. So, and especially on mobile, it's going to cause a lot of problems. So the trick is, how do you keep your images, how do you get them to be a smaller file size? So let's first go over the different types of files, image files you have, and you're probably well aware. There's, JPEG.jpg, there's PNG.png. These are the file extensions at the end of the file. There's GIF.gif. There's also a new one called SVG, which is it's a really cool file type, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. So let's go over the most common. Probably, a JPEG is the most common file type. That's what your camera shoots and saves as. That's what most of the images on the internet are. It's actually probably the most versatile file type, and I really like it a lot. It also is the easiest to optimize in terms of file size. So there's Now, here's my rule of thumb. Uh, you For most web pages, you really don't want your images to ever. There's really no need for most images to be over 100 kilobytes in file size. Once you're over 100 kilobytes, you're getting into this area of you're going to have a bloated website in terms of site speed. It's hard to do with big photos, and that's why you probably should have an image editing tool like Photoshop, or really there's probably hundreds of tools out there now. But you need to learn how to resize images and save them so that they still look good and the file size is small. If you take a picture with your iPhone, and you download it to your computer and you upload it to your site, it's gonna be an enormous image. First of all, the dimensions are gonna be huge. The size is gonna be enormous. So don't ever upload a raw photo from your phone on your website. That's the first thing you don't want. You just definitely don't want to do that. You want to put it into some image editing tool and resize it. I like Photoshop. I've been using it for years. It does cost money. There's really no way around it anymore. And usually what I would do in Photoshop is open up the image in Photoshop and then go File, Save for Web. And it gives you a cool little tool where you can switch between different file types to see what the image looks like and what the file size is. So you can toggle between JPEG, GIF, PNG, and you can see what the file size will be and what it actually looks like. And there'll be a little slider tool where you can actually slide the image quality to just the right place where you can find that sweet spot where the size is just right for you and the image still looks good. And then you save it as a new file, and I usually save it as a new file and rename it for SEO purposes. And you use that image and you upload that to your website, and then you can go, okay, well, this image is now, it was like 1.3 megabytes, now it's 50 kilobytes. It's an amazing savings in file size and in page load time. I wish I actually could give you numbers on what that would translate into speed. If I had to guess, on an average website, that could be like a 3-second increase in time to load, or decrease in time to load, which is amazing actually, because I think that's like if people have to wait more than 8 seconds, then they bounce. That's the general rule of thumb. That stat might even be from 2001. It might even be like only 5 seconds now. So there you go, right there. That's a great way to just take an image and reduce the file size. Another tool you can use, which is completely free, and I love it, I use it all the time, it's a website actually, it's just called TinyPNG, TinyPNG, and you can literally just drag your images right onto that website and they'll reduce the file size and optimize it for you on the fly. And you can do multiple images, and you can download them all once in a zip file, and it's an amazing tool. It's actually, to me, it's faster than using Photoshop because I never created like a batch function for Photoshop. And most of the time it does a good job of keeping the image quality good and the file size the right size, a nice small size. So the other file type I want to talk about is PNG, and PNG is a pretty cool file type. It's kind of like a cross between a GIF and a JPEG. PNGs are really amazing for like, I guess, decorative images or images that are not photos, like a chart, things with just a couple colors, a lot of white space. They can take a huge image and make it really small, and it scales real nicely. There's no real choppiness when it scales down, whereas if you resize a GIF, it looks really ugly. It will become very pixelated and crappy looking. That's why I never use GIFs ever. PNG is good for these type of charts and like informational images that are not photos. If it's a photo, PNG is usually always going to be a bigger file size than a JPEG, so it doesn't really work. Again, Photoshop's really good at resizing them. So is TinyPNG. That's why I recommend those two tools. There's also a free tool out there called GIMP, G-I-M-P, like the GIMP from Pulp Fiction. That's a free Photoshop tool. It's open source, so it's a little clunkier than Photoshop as far as I remember, but it's 100% free. Does everything that Photoshop can do, so you can use that program as well. And then finally GIFs, and there's been this resurgence in interest around GIFs because you see them all over the internet now, like the little short movie clip files of people doing something stupid like falling off a bicycle or something. And some people might say, well, why don't you want to use GIFs? GIFs are awesome. I love GIFs. I look at GIFs all day long on Imgur. Well, the problem is GIFs are huge. The file sizes are really big because basically it's a really bad way to compress a movie file is what it is. So you can have GIFs that are like 3 and 5 megabytes. They don't scale at all. They look like crap. GIFs basically were good for decorative images like back in the early 2000s, like the way PNGs were, but now there's really no reason to use them, so I just say stay away. The final thing I want to talk about was the SVG file. I think it stands for Scalable Vector Graphic. It's one of the best things I've found in my life recently. It's really hard to use SVGs unless you're a pretty savvy web designer, I guess. They only really work for vector images. So something you might have drew up in Adobe Illustrator, you can save it as an SVG. And it just works from, like, logos work well as SVGs, decorative images, background images, maybe if like some kind of wallpaper scheme on your website or something. But they're actually vector graphics. They're not images. So they scale perfectly. And on like an Apple Retina screen, they look incredible. And the file size is tiny. So it's a huge blessing for web designers. I highly recommend you guys use SVGs as much as you can. They look crystal clear, and then the file sizes are just tiny compared to like a PNG or JPEG. It's hard to use though if you're not used to using Illustrator or creating vector graphics. It's kind of tricky to understand how they work and why they work. But if you are playing around with that stuff, I would definitely give it a try. So let's see here. What else should we talk about? Okay, another thing I want to talk about was like homepage hero shots. So when I worked at Kissmetrics, I remember this. Our homepage hero shot was like 400 kilobytes, and I was just like, wait, why is it so big? Can't we make it smaller? The design team actually wanted to keep it the same size because they were afraid the image quality would be great if they made it any smaller. I kind of disagree. But they were very concerned about Retina screens back then, and they wanted to make sure that the image was always twice the size as is displayed on the browser. That's actually the trick with the Retina screens. Is if you double the image size in terms of dimensions, when you scale it down to 50% its width, it's going to look really clean. And so they'll upload. A lot of designers will use really high, large file size images for the sake of quality. So I get it. It looks great, but a 400 kilobyte image is going to slow your load time down. So I mean, what's more important at the end of the day, the conversion or the aesthetic? That's really up to you, your team to figure out. Sorry, I just had a sip of coffee there. So your homepage hero shots are really going to be huge images, and unless you're really testing those images out for conversion rate optimization, like A/B testing how those images affect your conversions on your homepage, images can dictate how whether people are going to sign up for a product or not, or sign up for a service on a homepage. I mean, even the gaze of the person in the photo can determine whether you're going to get more people signing up. So the hero image is important. The question is, can you also work with variations of file size of that hero shot? I would recommend doing that. If that image is taking up a lot of space, or it's a large file size, you're killing your page load time. So that's a factor in your conversion, right? So definitely test out different hero images and file sizes of those hero images. Okay. The next thing we're going to talk about are content delivery networks. They call them CDNs, and everyone will generally just say, "Oh, you should use a CDN because you can deliver your images and videos way faster with them," and that's true. Like, that's their purpose. However, I don't recommend them usually. Like I've really rarely seen an instance where you should use a CDN. If I was working in Amazon, yes, we would use them. When you have a massive site with tons of traffic, yeah, I get it. They make sense. If you have a smaller site and you don't have that much traffic, or even if you're only getting even if you get 1,000 or 10,000 people a day to like multiple pages of a website, I really don't see the reason for them. I've run into a lot of problems. That's why. First of all, the images don't really load that much faster, from what I can tell. Um, Also, there's weird stuff I don't like, which is images bring in traffic off the search engines, and CDNs, they host your images somewhere else other than your own domain name. So generally your site doesn't get credit for the images being hosted on CDN. So you can most people don't know how to set it up right, so they end up losing SEO value. So if you're doing infographics, or if you do a lot of images, or if you're like you're a jewelry maker and you keep taking pictures of different jewelry you make, you're not going to get those images are going to show up, the search results for your site. They're going to show up for the CDN. And there's ways around that. There's ways that you can. I think you adjust the CNAME in your DNS for that or something, or on the CDN's DNS. Problem is, a lot of people don't do that. And then the final reason why I don't like the CDN is even if you get all the technical SEO stuff like hammered out, we at Crazy Egg just switched over to HTTPS, and because of that, we couldn't configure our CDN the right way, and so we lost some image traffic because of that. And so it just becomes this big pain in the butt to make it work right for your site. So unless you have a really big technical team behind you and you're just doing a lot of traffic, and you have a very busy site, then it's worth considering. But for the average site, even for slightly big businesses, I don't really see a point. Now the other thing that people talk about is caching, website caching, and website caching actually is a really good idea. I've just started using a service called Cloudflare, and they'll cache the images for you. So you're not really using a CDN so much. You're using like a website caching service, and they also give you free HTTPS. It's pretty easy to set up. WordPress is a little tricky with Cloudflare. You have to install a couple plugins to make it work right, and I don't remember them off the top of my head. But once you figure it out, it's pretty cool because your site should load a little faster. Everything's cached. That means like all the content is stored on the DNS level so that it instantly is available to anyone that accesses it. It doesn't have to load when someone goes to your website. Or doesn't have to. Well, I guess technically it does load, but it's a lot faster than if it wasn't cached. So I do recommend using that service. Check them out. Again, it's Cloudflare. I don't have any relationship with them. I just started using them. So it's CLOUDFLARE. So cloud and then flare, like lens flare. Okay. Next thing I was going to talk about was JavaScript and other JavaScript type services. So you can do a lot of stuff with JavaScript. Obviously, you can code stuff in JavaScript, and it can make your front end of your website more magical, because you can code whatever you want in JavaScript, and it takes place on the browser end. There's also services that you put little JavaScript snippets in the source code, and you can, like Google Analytics uses the JavaScript snippet. Other services, if you run ads, probably a lot of your ads are JavaScript based. And these things can cause problems in terms of page load time. Things like Google Analytics, I really don't think it has much of I've never really seen it have an effect. So for small web services, B2B, like marketing services, your snippets aren't going to really cause any issue with page load. And I think they work asynchronously, so I don't think it matters at all. The biggest problem are probably the people who are in the ad business, or who use ads as a way to monetize their site. That stuff generally slows down a site a lot, right? So one way to make a lot of money as a publisher is to stick a lot more ads on your site, but then your page load time. I mean, every day I go to websites where I can't even use them because the ad network, whatever it's doing in the background, it's basically rendering the page impossible to read or use. And I don't understand why these people try to monetize like this. Like, you got to cut off those services. If they might have great payouts, but if they're ruining the user experience and no one can read the content, no one's gonna click on the ad, or maybe I don't know, maybe you still get paid for the impression even though no one got to see the page. I don't know, but definitely those are going to be your biggest culprits, and you're going to want to test and weed out the ones that are slowing your site down the most. But so in general, just be aware of JavaScript. It can slow down things a lot. You might want to take an inventory of what's on each web page and like what's loading and what you don't need and what you do need, and really watch that carefully. That could actually be worse than images in terms of page load time. And obviously, it's a little more technical. All right, so my last thing I was going to talk about is cheap, crappy web hosting. And so a lot of people who are just starting out on the internet and want to make money and run a business, some kind of online business, you're probably going to get like the bottom of the barrel cheap web hosting, I'm assuming. I've tried every single thing you can imagine. I've done shared web hosting. I've done dedicated servers. I've done virtual servers. So like I've had my own computer running at a web hosting service that was all mine versus the shared crappy hosting. So this is the way it works. The $1 web hosting, basically what happens is your website is on a computer in a web hosting facility. It's like a big warehouse full of computers, and on one of those computers in that facility, you are one of 100 or 1,000 or 10 different websites on that, sharing that hard drive and all those resources. And so basically, what's happening is you're competing with everyone else on that computer in terms of resources, and sometimes it's not a big deal. Sometimes it totally works fine, and you can run a business off of it. Problem is, you just really don't know what happens. Also, there are some kind of things. There's other things that can happen, like if someone's running their email off that server and they're like a spammer, that could ruin your own email deliverability potentially. There's other weird stuff. And so, from my experience of purchasing web hosting for 17 years, I generally don't like shared web hosting, like unless it's just a site it's not really important. It's just for fun, and I don't really care. I'll throw something on one of those. But if I want to be serious about something, I try to at least get a virtual dedicated hosting plan, which is like the next stage up. Usually, it's a little more advanced hosting facility. The way that it's like kind of cloud computing, the way they share resources and give people bandwidth is a little more democratic. It's set up in a way where you're not going to have a lot of the weird issues that the shared hosting has, like the email issue I explained. And for most of the time, I've found that the virtual dedicated hosting is sufficient for most things that I've worked on. However, I did have my own dedicated server for a long time, and it was expensive. I think we were paying $200 a month. I mean, that's not even that expensive, but at the time, I mean, it seemed a little expensive for hosting. And honestly, that site was lightning fast. And that wasn't, there was nothing, the machine wasn't that hopped up. It was just, my own computer in a web hosting facility that had it, no one else was on it. And from my experience, that was the best thing that, in terms of site speed ever. Like uploading things was super fast. The site, like every page load really fast. So that kind of tells you that even like the virtual dedicated servers aren't even they're not the same as a dedicated one by any means. The only problem with the dedicated server is that generally, most places you have to manage everything. So you have to upgrade all the like PHP, the Apache, the spam stuff. You're responsible for everything. So you become like a technician. You can pay for managed dedicated hosting, dedicated server hosting. If I were to ever get a dedicated server again, I would definitely do that, because trying to become like a Linux administrator is not really something I want to spend all my time doing. So yeah. So if you're going to be serious about business, you're probably going to want to get your own dedicated server. I had a client once that even had their own search engine in addition to multiple dedicated servers. So their site relied heavily on search, and in order to have fast search speeds, which also improves conversions, they had to have a dedicated search engine computer to service just searches. So you can see where it starts to get more technical and complicated. Okay, so I think I went over all the major things that matter for site speed. You can use sites like Pingdom to pingdom.com and just check your page speeds. Test a sample of your site, like multiple URLs, and run them through Pingdom like a few times and then do it a few different days and then average the times for each page load and see what your average page speed is. Don't just run it through once because that's not a good representation. If all your pages, I think they have a tool in there that tells you if your site is fast or not. It's a pretty good service. It's pretty easy to understand. I would say if your pages are loading in 3 to 5 seconds, you're pretty good. If you have any issues beyond that, where pages take longer than that, then work on those pages first. Like work on the images and work on the things that they tell you you should look at. If you're like, oh man, I'm on the shared hosting plan and my page load times are terrible, no one can get to my site's down all the time, move, go to a new hosting facility. Anyway, so yeah, let me know if you have any questions in the comments. Sorry I didn't have like an interesting story this time like last time, but this was a little more technical and boring. But hopefully the next episodes will be a little more engaging. I am getting over a cold, so maybe that's what it was. Okay, thanks.